Welcome back. This is Simone. This is SGCF Road. This is my Range Rover. In this video, I'm going to be taking out the V8, the m62 TU motor right here, and I'm going to be putting in m54 6-cylinder, and then I'm going to be doing an 8-speed swap from a ZF5 HP to a GM4L 5L40, and then to the ZF 8 HP. So stay tuned and we'll get into this. Alright, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to get into the reasons for the swap, how is it going to go down. So this is going to be a lot of pictures and a lot of talking. So get buckled in, or just start listening and do whatever. With that aside, let's get into this. Let's get started. So here we have a m62 B44 TU motor. Here we got the m54 B30 engine. Reasons for the swap, that's the first question going to come up, but people's going to ask. Two things: reliability, fuel economy. It's that simple. With the current gas price, everybody can understand that, and with the m62 rep, everybody can understand that. But I'll give a little bit more of a detailed breakdown because I feel like it needs to be done to have a proper understanding. So we'll start, with the m62. We'll break it down. We know the issues. They're known as timing chain guides. The breakdown, Vano seals get back, so you start getting that diesel rock when it goes like talk, 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 when cold starts or idle, things like that. And reason for that is because the seals are bad, so they're losing oil pressure. And funny enough, which also the diesel knock causes the guides to break because the chains are constantly getting on and off slap, the timing chain that goes in, because the camshafts, they're just rocking back and forth uncontrollably. And that would actually, depends which one happens first. One will cause the other one, or vice versa. With that aside, the reasons those things happen is because the motor is very hot. That's the reason why the plastic breaks down, because you got to keep in mind, in Teflon steel to this day, and some of the applications inside the motor, and we're still using plastics inside of the timing chain components, things like that. The reason it's not breaking down as much because the motors have better cooling now. We have water pumps that run up to shut off, keeping the coolant flowing, keeping the motor cool. These older engines, they did not get that pleasure. And for the emissions purposes, they have the motor running about 230 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a very, very hot boy. So you can imagine what kind of havoc that runs on the engine, and then especially if you shut it off and just sits there and it bakes its own juices and heat, and it's just heat soaks. Not that good. Not that good at all. My very own personal experience. Here's a picture of me putting a motor in mine, because my motor internally blew apart. Not the timing chain, because that was already done with the guides and the Vano seal rebuild, but it blew apart because of the heat. I was on a trail, I had a coolant tank grenade, I was an hour into the trail, so the vehicle had to get pulled off, shut off, started up again, water dumped in. By the time it got limped out, internal damage to the engine was done because the oil got so thin because it's just so hot. And that's the biggest issue with that V8, is the heat, as the 90s emissions and everything else, so they had to turn up the temperature. As the older thermostats are actually colder, in the race applications, I've seen people put in older M62 from the 80s thermostats in because they run the motor colder. And funny enough, as I rebuilt my motor, well, I rebuilt another engine that I put into it, I found the colder temp thermostat. And this one does not set off a light, keeps the codes off, check engine light off, because it's a straight-driven vehicle, so I have to pass emissions tests, things like that. But unfortunately, it only drops the temperature down about 10 degrees, 15 to 10 degrees, puts it about 200, 210 running up temperature. It's definitely colder than it was before, and that should help also with the oil leaks. That's another thing that I didn't mention. Well, now I'm mentioning. Is the valve covers, they all leak all around, and upper timing chain covers, is because it's so hot in those corners. It has to go there's not a lot of bolts holding them down like on newer engines where you have a bunch of bolts all up around. So you throw that in, and all that heat causes those gaskets to break down, get rock hard way earlier in the lifespan than they should. So this cold return thermostat has been around for a couple of years, and that has helped with the leaks. You don't have to replace your valve covers every 2 years. It has helped out with the longevity of the internals, of the timing components, and the vano seals. And that's because you don't have as much heat. I mean, but you still have that heat soak, but it's not as bad. M54, on the other hand, does not suffer from those failures. For one, the motor runs about a little bit colder. It runs about 212 degrees roughly. They do have a lower temp thermostat for it as well, which I believe is about 190. So, but another upgrade they have for M54 is high flow water pump. So it improves the coolant flow about 20%. Some say it's 30 to 40, but they do have a high flow water pump available, which is again better improvement for cooling, especially if you're off-roading or towing. Huge improvements, and that's why M54 is more reliable. For one, they also use dual vanos. It's a little upgrade. We'll get into that a little bit here in a second. So, but those things make it a much better motor. It runs a little bit less hotter. It has less complicated, less timing chains wrapped around all over the place. A lot better engine. And, you know, with a small displacement, get better fuel economy. Now we'll get into performance. So something needs to be understood. You know, it's going to put in a smaller engine in a heavy vehicle. It will be slower, it's expected. I know it, you know it. But it will not be as much slower as you would think, especially with the transmission upgrade, and I'll get into that a little bit later here in the video. So the M54, as I mentioned, uses dual vanos. So the vanos is the variable valve timing that the BMW uses for their, that's what they call them. M62 TU, that's a technical update. It got a single vanos unit, which is only on the intake camshaft, while the M54 uses it on the intake and exhaust. That drastically improved its already superior torque curve, because the 6 cylinders, you can do some research, you can watch some videos to explain it down a little bit better, but the 6 cylinders have better torque curve naturally because of the firing order and the way it happens. So that improves even already improved torque curve to a better standard, and improves you know, some of the fuel economy as well, almost a 6 cylinder. Another thing it has going for it is DISA. It's basically variable intake, and that is variable intake runners, changes the way the air flows inside. So, you know, say here it goes straight path, and here does a little swirl or something. Something like that. The point of it is it improves low-end torque, and at a higher RPMs it opens up, closes, whatever way you can look it up, which way it does it on that. But regardless, it improves high and top-end flow for the horsepower. All those improvements make it a very reliable and very decently performing engine. So how does it stack up against M62? Not as much as I'm making it sound. So M62 has 286 horsepower and 325 foot-pounds of torque. The 6-cylinder, it got 226 horsepower and 220 foot-pounds of torque. And I know I'm making it sound super huge when I was displaying those things, but something you got to keep in mind: that 6-cylinder is 45% smaller than the V8. And if you think about it and do some little bit of math, a little bit of calculating, the V8 got a 16% about that horsepower improvement. It only got about 60 horsepower, but yet it's 45% bigger. It did get about 100 foot-pounds more torque, which kind of adds up to about 45%, so it is that there. But in overall, it's a very luxury engine when you break it down. Its reliability is not there, and performance not there for the size increase. 45% and average of 30% across both improvement, not that great at all. It's pretty poor. Why I'm doing this 6-cylinder. And that's going to be, so how will the cylinder will behave inside of this Rover? Here we'll take a little, we'll have to go to a little walk, little theory walk. There's going to be a couple of cars mentioned. It's, if you follow through, you'll keep notes maybe, but we'll get into it. I'll put numbers up here as we go across somewhere here. So the Rover's curb weight with the V8 is 5,300 pounds. As a comparison, there's another vehicle that has the same V8 and the same 6-cylinder, and it's, you know, same size, more or less same size vehicle, is an E53 BMW X5. This guy weighs 5,000 pounds with the V8, and it weighs about 5,700 with the 6-cylinder. That's a 300-pound weight loss. So there we can expect the Rover to drop weight about 300 pounds. Obviously it'll be a variance, but we can expect to drop about 300 pounds. At that point it puts it at 5,000 pounds. So next we're going to take a look at another comparable vehicle that has a better gearbox, which has close to first gear ratio and the 6th gear overdrive ratio. We'll get into ratios here in a moment. And that's going to be E70 X5. The reason I'm picking this vehicle is because it came with naturally aspirated m52 6-cylinder engine, producing about 250 horsepower and 220 foot-pounds of torque. Pretty close to our m54. It's a bit newer motor, and the real reason that some with this couple improvements over obviously why it has a bit more power, but also revs up higher. So that needs to be kept in mind, as NAs produce more naturally aspirated, produce more power, and rev up higher. But that car with that 6-cylinder overdrive, it weighs at 5,000 pounds. I know it's a little stretch, but it's there. And I have driven those, and yeah, it's not super crazy fast, but it does move, and the gear ratios help. And here we'll get into the transmission now. So we took the little theory walk. So here I have the transmissions. I'm going to be looking at 3 transmissions because I mentioned the 6-speed, so it's only fair that I show that as well. So here we have the all ZF transmissions, just to keep in mind, and so understand, and the GM gearbox that was used with diesels in the Range Rover is close to a ZF transmission 5 HP, but it has slightly lower or longer gear ratio. It depends how you look at it. Basically it's a little bit different ratio, but it has 410 gears on the differentials versus 373 that the Range Rover has. But because the gear ratio is a little lower, so but they even out. But just keep that in mind. So here we have the ZF 5 HP. We got the first gear, second gear, third gear, fifth gear, and we got the 5th gear, the overdrive gear. And here we got the ZF 6 HP, which is the 6-speed from the E70. So right there we can see a better first gear. That's going to be our takeoff, our initial acceleration gear, and tow gear, whatever you want to look at it. It's a lot better. And then the second gear is kind of more or less like the first gear on the ZF 6 HP. I mean 5 HP. And here we got the second gear, and it's more or less about the same as the first gear on the 5-speed. And then let's look on the overdrive. A lot better gear on the overdrive. Next, here we got the 8-speed, the 8 HP. First gear is even better. Second gear is about on par with the first gear of the 6-speed. And now let's take a look at the last 2 gears, specifically the overdrive, the last gear, overdrive gear. A lot better for highway cruising. Let me break it down this way. As it sits, when I go to work, I go about 70 to 80 miles an hour, and I'm about 2,600 RPM in the Range Rover for that. Granted, I don't drive it that fast because of that, because you'll just pour fuel out. I might as well just dump it out, especially with current prices of fuel. It's just not good. So I drive it slow. I drive about 70, but I'm still about 2,300 RPM at that speed. Now I'll get in as an example. I'll use my 5 Series that I own with the 8-speed in it. I know it's not quite the same comparison, but in that car I'll go 80, 85, and I'll be about 2,200 RPM. That's a huge difference. So if I would go 70 in it, I'm about 1,900, maybe 2,000. It's a lot of fuel economy improvement right there, just because RPM band is not that big on the V8. It's about 6,500, so you're almost close to half of it. Pretty close to, as an example, 50% throttle. Even though it's not works like that, but you get the idea. So that's a lot of inefficiency in the transmission itself. So with the 8 HP, based on gear calculations, RPM calculations, and everything else, going about 70, 80 miles an hour can be accomplished at about 2,000 RPMs. 1,800, 2,000 RPMs with the 8 HP with the current gear ratio in the diffs. And that's where all that improvement with us. So you combine that with a 6-cylinder, and that's what all the improvement will be here. You'll combine that with a 6-cylinder. You'll have decent good acceleration because of the better transmission gear ratios and initial gears, and you'll have even better fuel economy because it's a 6-cylinder, 3-liter, and low RPM at a high speed. And next we can bring up, how is it going to get mounted to the Rover? Well, there's a company, Online Gearboxes or Synchro Gearboxes. Here's their little link typed out there for you. They sell an adapter because a friend of mine in Europe, he did a 6-speed transmission with his diesel, and he ended up gets the worked out transfer case adapter. And the transfer case adapter works with the 8-speed and the 6-speed. That's all for both. So it's there to use the Range Rover's transfer case, the m5225. An interesting thing, I'm not going to get into the details between transmissions here, unless somebody asks me to break them down, but the GM gearbox, the 5-speed, and the ZF 5-speed are actually longer by about 30 millimeters than the 6-speed and the 8-speed. The 6-speed and 8-speed have the same body length. And the adapter is about 30 millimeters. So with that adapter, we get to bolt the transfer case. We don't need custom drive shafts, or prop shafts, however you want to call them. It's all bolts up. Now, from that point, we're going to have to mold it up to the engine. This is again with the V8 takes another loss. There is no transmission that bolts up to V8. There is an adapter that our company makes that's about 30 millimeters long. It's about $1,200 and uses a diesel transmission. So for one, we're probably going to end up needing new custom drive shafts, prop shafts. So that's already another cost on top. Second, diesel transmissions, and I'm in the USA. Hence why a lot of this is happening. I don't have an M57 engine, the diesel motor. I can get one because there is some here, but for me to put in a Rover for the registration purposes will be a disaster, especially in the state that I live in. Just not going to happen. So diesel training is going to be hard to come by, and then you have the adapter and custom drive shafts. It becomes a pretty close and very expensive, let's put it this way, task, which I'm budgeting. This is a budget build, and I'm not trying to get into it. So I'm an unreliable motor and a lot of money into making it work with the 8-speed. Does not work out. With a 6-cylinder though, E46 guys, this is a 3 Series BMW made from 98, 99 till 05. They mounted an 8-speed directly to M54. The 8-speed came out of the 2010 and up engine, M55, and it directly mounted to the M54. No adapter needed. For the flywheel part to make the torque converter work, the M54's torque converter, which is a BMW motor made from about 06 till 2010, till the other one replaced it, that flywheel bolts up directly to the 6-cylinder M54 that I'm using, and it also bolts up direct torque converter in the 8-speed. It's almost like a match made in heaven. So at that point, I'm just going to have to drop the motor into my Rover. Plan to use an X5 engine mounts because they have same locations for the mounting points, so it should work out. I'll find out if there's any last minute differences, a few centimeters here, a few centimeters there, we'll see. And I also ordered a M57 diesel oil pan to use to mount up the front diff, because the Range Rover's differential is big. It's a 8-inch Dana 40. For those of you who don't know, now you do. And that diff will not mount up to anything but the rubber pan. X5 pan uses a bigger differential than the say 3 Series or smaller passenger cars, but it's still not as big as the Rovers. And not like I can use X5 pan with X5 diff, moving the matching the gear ratios aside. The reason is because of the it uses 27 splines axle. That's where it goes inside the differential into the spider gears, while the Rover uses a 30 spline. So I'm not going to be able to use the axles, and that'll be an issue as well. But so we'll see how this turns out, and I'm gonna stay along here for the ride, and I'll see you guys on next.